Hey guys, welcome back to Threes and Blitz. And I know it's been a while, but hey, let's get started with today's video. And today we're just going to be talking about, two of the worst teams in the NBA, specifically in the Western Conference, the New Orleans Pelicans and the Los Angeles Clippers. So let's get started with the New Orleans Pelicans right now, the worst team in the Western Conference at 4-22, and they do not have their first round pick this year, which is crazy because this draft class is one of the deepest and strongest draft classes we've seen in a while. And it's just crazy how, 1 year can change a team. And in particular, it's just because the New Orleans Pelicans, they have so many veterans around, Derek Queen and Jeremiah Fears. And then you trade CJ McCollum, who, yes, I agree, needed to go because you're kind of at a still with him. You kind of knew his limitations and what he could do, offensively. And you trade for, a young, more promising, who's also an NBA champion, Jordan Poole. And everyone, kind of liked that move. They were like, okay, you're moving younger, but he's still a veteran. He could still, develop, Jeremiah Fears and, be that mentor that Steph Curry was to him. And then obviously you still have Zion Williams, who you're like, okay, he really needs to lose the weight. And if he's going to take, this serious, we're going to need to see some, progress. And we saw it in the offseason when the season opened. Hey, he looked good. His weight looked controlled. And I was like, okay, this team has potential to, be that, 4 to 6 seed. And I think everyone was really high on Trey Murphy too. And obviously he still is, a really, really good player. I think he's gonna always be that borderline all-star player, but that every team needs that type. And then you still have, Sadiq Bey, who is a veteran in this league, and he could play that 3 and D position. And then you obviously extended Herb Jones and Jose Alvarado. You have these people, Jordan Hawkins, who's still, a young, I wouldn't say promising player, but he is a, reliable player to come off the bench or maybe, start a couple games if, injuries happen. And with this team, injuries always happen. And I was just like, okay, if they're trading up to get Derek Queen, they're giving up a first round pick because they believe, hey, we're not going to be, one of the worst teams in the NBA and give up, a top 5 pick in this year's draft class. And even if we miss the playoff or the play in tournament, hey, we're not going to really care about giving up a 14th pick or, even a 10th pick in this year's draft class. But now this draft class is looking so good, so deep. Even giving up those type of picks could be, something that, hey, man, we're missing out on this player that could change this team or, can make this team a more playoff team or even a quote unquote championship team. And I'm not even mentioning, the signing of like Looney. You're bringing an NBA champion too, and I thought this was going to be a really good signing, but of course, injuries always happen. And I just don't know with this team. There might be something in the water over there because I think it's time to blow this team up. And I hate to say that because Zion Williams' talent is just out of this world. And he could be, a top 15 player if he was healthy because he could basically do everything on the court. He's not going to really be a liability that much on defense because his athleticism is through the roof. And of course, with time, that's just going to go down and down and down. And then he's going to become that defensive liability. And we've seen it with a lot of people. I mean, look at Joel Embiid. I mean, basically his knees are just gone. Yes, he could still, defend the post, but perimeter, he's not stopping anyone. And he's not really switching as fast as you would like. And this is going to happen to Zion Williams, whether he's going to lose a bunch of weight or not, just because all these injuries and all these surgeries that are happening on his body are going to take a toll on him. So what do you do at this point if you're the New Orleans Pelicans? Now, Derek Queen has looked super good, really good for a rookie. I mean, he's 6'9", 6'10", but he's passing, like Jokic. And I just look at him. I looked at the game against the Spurs, and when he dropped that triple double, a 30-point triple double, and yes, they lost, but they also came back from, I believe, 20 to 25 points, and they almost won that game against I would say, pretty healthy Spurs. Of course, they were missing, Victor Wembanyama, but like they basically had everyone there, and they have, De'Aaron Fox, Stephon Castle, Harper. They had Harrison Barnes, Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell. They're basically the whole team, and this young rookie almost, came back from 25 to beat that veteran team. And I think around the league, people were looking at him like, wow, the Pelicans really, need to, kind of switch who they're focused on because when they traded up for Derek Queen, they were like, this person can make Zion better. Now, I think the shift has turned this, hey, what can make Derek Queen better? We get better players around him that are, more of a better, defensive 3-and-D type players, not much of a superstar like Zion Williams. So if I'm the New Orleans Pelicans, I would, potentially move Zion, this season. Because this season, I would, call it quits. There's no really coming back from, this record. I mean, it's just so stacked in the West. This is maybe if it was the Eastern Conference, and I say maybe because that's still, a horrendous record. But I would potentially look into, where this draft pick is going to land. If it's landing top 5, can you move up? Can you move Zion Williams to, a contender team to move up in this draft class? Because at this point, I think the Zion experiment is over. You know what he's going to be. You know he's this all-star, top 15, top 20 player in this league when healthy. But the key word is when. And at this point, you cannot wait anymore. And with Derek Queen, you see the flashes, you see the potential, and I think you need to capitalize on this. And the second team we're going to talk about is the Los Angeles Clippers. And this team, I think, is more disappointing than any team around the NBA, just because this team has some of the most veteran presence, Hall of Famers on this team. You have a veteran head coach who's won an NBA championship, and overall, I think the Clippers are just a really old team. And I say that, not in a bad way. You need these veterans. It's just defensively, they cannot keep up anymore. I mean, Kawhi Leonard is never going to play 65 games too. He's always going to be hurt. And defensively, I don't think he's going to be there anymore. And of course, they got rid of CP3 for basically acting as a veteran point guard. I mean, how many times have we seen CP3, call out players and coaches for, not taking the game seriously or missing, defensive, stops? It just doesn't make sense. You knew who CP3 was. It's just, hey, he's not contributing, 18 points anymore, 16 points anymore. So, what he says doesn't fly. It just doesn't make sense for me. And then you have James Harden, who, yes, is carrying the load offensively, who is saving your season. I mean, if he wasn't on this team would not be 6-19. This team would be, probably the worst team in the NBA. They would probably have maybe 2-3 wins, maybe 4 wins if James Harden wasn't averaging, 28 points a game. And yes, Kawhi Leonard is always going to be hurt. He's never going to play 65 games. The Clippers have to realize that and don't make the offense focus on him. And I like Zubac, but Zubac could do so much. He's not really a player you're going to be drawing plays for. He's in this Bradley Beal signing. Yes, he's out for the season with that hip injury. But overall, even when he was there, it just wasn't a good fit because Bradley Beal needs the ball in his hands. He's a shooting guard. He's not a point guard. He's a shooting guard that can get others involved. If he's not scoring the ball, he's not really contributing, on the defensive end, or he's not playmaking, or he's not making these little things to make the game easier for, your star player or for, this other role player. And it just wasn't a good fit in Phoenix. And I don't know why the Clippers thought it was going to be a good fit with them. I guess it was a better potential signing because he wasn't on, a no trade clause. He wasn't getting paid $40-50 million a year. He was getting paid, on the minimum contract. So yeah, it kind of worked in the Clippers' favor. They're not really investing so much into Bradley Beal like the Suns did. But yeah, overall, I did not like that signing because that's not really what they needed. They needed more, of those 3-and-D players, those guys that basically can make Kawhi Leonard and James Harden's life super easy. And unfortunately, Bradley Beal's not that. I don't think he ever really was, maybe in the beginning of his career, but overall, bad signing. And then you got players like John Collins, and I like John Collins off the bench, in my opinion. I think he's just a score first power forward. And yes, he could help, James Harden in the offense of, hey, you can't really carry the load at the age of, 36 anymore. Give it to John Collins. But yes, defensively, it makes this team way worse because those two guys are not really competing in the defensive end. Boban Bojanovic is not really that spark off the bench either. I think they should move on from him if they can for a more defensive player. Even if they get a worse player offensively in the trade back, it's just you really need help in the defensive end. I think right now Chris Dunn and Kawhi Leonard are obviously kind of the ones that are competing in the defensive end. But let's say, Chris Dunn always gets in foul trouble. If he gets 3 early fouls, you kind of put in CP3. You don't got that luxury anymore. You don't really have a backup point guard, especially a veteran backup point guard. I know CP3 is 40, so again, another defensive liability because he's 40 years old and a small, undersized point guard. At this age, he was not going to compete really defensively anyways. Brooke Lopez is looking like a shell of himself. I think everyone knew he wasn't going to really average, 15 to 16 points, but I think maybe, that 10 to 12 points, maybe 36 to 38% from three, maybe a block or two. And right now, he's just not doing it. He's currently coming off bench. It just doesn't look right. This team looks like a 2K roster that's kind of being forced to play together. And I just don't see this team really competing in the playoff series. Maybe they could do a playing, tournament if they get all the right pieces together. Maybe later on after the trade deadline, they make some moves before that. But yeah, I don't know. But yeah, let me know in the comments of what you think of these two teams.